Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Full Out Healing podcast and show. I'm Sable, your host, and I'm so excited. This is episode 15. What a huge accomplishment. Now, today's episode is coming straight from yesterday's episode, or that is in yesterday's episode. Episode 14, which was unboxable. I thought I healed that. I came up with so many episodes ideas during that episode, and so this is one of them. And today's episode is called I Didn't Feel Black Enough, Queer Enough, or Femme Enough. Okay? I'm going to talk about how I related to this idea in the past, how I relate to it now, and my hopes and desires for the future. Okay? So, when I think about the thoughts I used to have around this idea included basically the meaning I made of my life and the circumstances that surrounded my life. I took that to mean that I wasn't Black enough, queer enough, or femme enough. I used to think that I was not Black enough because I felt like I didn't quite fit on either side of my family. So my father's side is Ghanaian, my mother's side is Trinidadian. And I didn't really, when I spent time with family, I realized, wow, I really don't know the name of all the food, and I don't recognize all of these songs, and I don't speak the language or have the accent. And and not only on top of that, when I was at school and there were other Black kids and other Black kids who were Black American, I felt on the outside because I didn't have family down south. And so I felt like, damn, I remember thinking, damn, there are literally 3 types of Black communities and I don't fit into any of them. That really challenged my sense of like belonging and sense of feeling like I was Black enough. And not only that, the things that I was interested in, they were not like mainstream Black, quote unquote. That's the meaning I made of it as a child, and that I realized I subconsciously carried into adulthood. I also, as a youth and in my adulthood, I felt not queer enough. I felt not queer enough because I didn't feel like I looked gay. I also, and because of that, I felt like it was I felt isolated from other queer people and found it hard to find queer community. And I also was kind of a late bloomer and didn't start dating until I was like in my 20s, to be honest. And so I just didn't feel queer enough. I didn't feel like I had the queer experiences that you see, like this tortured love story in high school. I just couldn't have been farther from that for a variety of reasons. And I just felt so on the outside. And also, particularly in my late teens, early 20s, when I was in queer spaces, I just felt so undesirable. I think part of it was because at my core, I felt undesirable, but I also just noticed, I just felt like the dynamics I noticed in communities with queer women, I just felt on the margin of desire. And, I'll just say that's how I felt at the time. And I also felt, I grew up not feeling girly enough and then eventually not feeling femme enough. I didn't feel girly enough because I'm actually, by the time I was in 5th grade, I was 5'10", size 13 shoe. Spoiler alert, I continue to grow. And so I'm more than a size 13 and I'm more than 5'10" now. And, as a kid, I just felt so deeply, intensely awkward. I felt like my height and my size just I felt outside of what it meant to be girly as a kid. And almost, yeah, I honestly, I felt almost, it's weird saying this out loud, but I'm realizing because I didn't feel girly enough, I felt as if I was afraid of being found out as like being mannish because I'm not like dainty and small. And it just really made me want to literally physically shrink. Like I literally would spend so much energy wishing I was smaller. And I just didn't want attention on me as a result, because I felt embarrassed and ashamed of it. And in terms of thinking about what's wild is how this sort of translated to me feeling not femme enough, because I felt like an imposter to my femininity because of my size. There were just aspects of my femininity that were just unexplored and unexpressed. And I just felt like just this deep sense of not enoughness as a result of it. And when it comes to feeling queer enough, I think I just talked about that. But what I want to add about it is I didn't feel queer enough because I didn't feel like I looked gay. And I also felt invisible in the queer community or in queer spaces because of that, right? I used to feel so self-conscious of, oh my gosh, like, what if everyone thinks I'm just like a straight person taking up too much space and like being like that annoying person, just by virtue of being there. That was sort of all the meaning I made of how I happened to move through the world in this body, right? It all translated to thinking incessantly, Sable, you're not black enough. Sable, you're not queer enough. Sable, you're not femme enough. And ultimately, this all translated to feeling like I didn't belong. And possibly even worse than feeling like I didn't belong, I felt like an imposter to these identities. I almost felt like I was intruding and like an unwelcome encroacher onto the space, which is really challenging and tough and awkward because damn, like how do you feel like an intruder to your own fucking identity? I don't know, I figured it out. So I just really didn't, I just felt a deep sense of isolation, a deep sense of longing to belong somewhere. And then that also was paired with feeling like I didn't deserve to want to belong in that space because I didn't fit in whatever those boxes were. Now, within the narratives that I used to carry around this used to be, I really genuinely believe that the specific details and nuances of my life proved that I didn't belong in these respective spaces and communities and identities. I thought that, because I grew up by and large isolated from either side of my family, that meant that I didn't deserve to claim either of those identities. I thought that, and I thought that because I was, I don't know if you've caught on, but I've been a nerd my whole life. And, legit nerd. Like, I obsessively followed Harry Potter when the books were still being released, I would literally attend midnight magic parties at Barnes and Nobles. Like, it was great. That type of nerd. And I felt like that was proof, like the things that I genuinely enjoyed and brought me joy. I thought that was proof against my blackness, you know, which is really sad when I think about the fact that something that brought me so much joy, somehow my mind found a way to make it count against me. I also, and also, ironically, that whole bit of, you know, my interests are what make me not black enough. My alma mater, words, where I went to undergrad, Swarthmore College, a huge reason why I chose that space is because I remember going to the BCC, the Black Cultural Center, meeting the current Black students on campus and realizing, oh my gosh, I could be a nerd in public here. There are other Black nerds. Like, I was just so excited to see the spaciousness around that and that I could have space for that, and really identified, like, saw examples of like other Black people just being their nerdy selves and identifying with it, and yet still it just didn't integrate into my understanding. Now, how this all shook out within the context of abuse, my different identities and like the not feeling enoughness within the context of that abusive relationship, there was this narrative that I have privilege as it relates to those identities that that infect my perception, which makes how I see things inherently fucked up. What do I mean when I say that? My privilege of, you know, having my privilege around the fact that I know my dad is from Ghana, for example. I know where my people come from. I know some of where my people come from. And that's a privilege that means I can't understand being Black in America. My privilege with basically not looking queer, not looking gay, means that I can move through the world with straight privilege, and that basically means that what I understand about queerness is fucked up and doesn't count because people don't see a queer person when they look at me. And my experience of feminist, which now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, how did this all fit at the same time? But I didn't really understand what it meant like to be like a woman because people treated me different because I had pretty privilege, and therefore everything that I perceived came from a place of privilege and is inherently fucked up and inherently oppressive, right? So like the general narrative is that because of all of these aspects of my identity and how I experience the world, my perception, my opinion, and my perspective were inherently fucked up. Also, another narrative that existed within the context of abuse was, in a way, my ex-wife was kind of like the gatekeeper of Blackness, queerness, and my feminist. And so what I mean when I say that is I could only have a vaguely redeemable Black identity, queer identity, and femme identity through my proximity to her. and with her approval. It really became a point of contention in the relationship, and eventually became it eventually became a topic that I created a boundary around, which then served to prove later in the relationship why I am a villain and problematic. But there was like a huge, we just like really, we had a massive disagreement that ended in a violent outburst around Blackness. And it just, like, without going into like the details of that argument and the violence that surrounded aren't important. What is important was what I walked away with, and the meaning I made of it, and the feeling and the fears I kind of took away from it. I took away from it that there's something wrong with how I relate to and understand Blackness of myself and as a member of the diaspora. And that in some way, my ex-wife had a more enlightened and accurate perspective on Blackness. She was also kind of like the gatekeeper of queerness, because, you know, I look back and I think now I can recognize she was really threatened by me having relationships with other queer people, and just really, I don't know, just had this way of positioning herself as like the only way I can access my queerness was through her approval, through like my relationship with her, through my performance of being what she wanted me to be. Like she just kind of made it seem as if she was like this all-knowing encyclopedia on queerness. And if I disagreed with anything that was in her text of queerness, then I was wrong or problematic or oppressive. I see now that, you know, I won't get into that, but that's what it was. That's kind of how it functioned. At the time, I believed I was an outsider. I believed I was an outsider throughout my childhood and my adult life. And that belief in being an outsider just like was on steroids within the context of abuse. Because what I heard in my inner world, I started to actually hear in my outer world. And then my ex-wife helped sort of cultivate a sense of isolation that created visible evidence that supported this, you know, notion that I'm an outsider. I also believe that I am, at my core, I am not enough. I believe that I was not Black enough, not queer enough, not femme enough, and even worse, that I could never make up for how not enough I was. And the best I could hope for and the best I could do is to try to get her approval. And that's the closest proximity I could ever have to being enough, is this contingent approval. And I also believed, you know, I really did internalize the narrative that I had these privileges that made me fucked up. And because I internalized this belief, because I internalized that narrative of the relationship, I started to believe that I don't deserve to take space in those communities. And I started to believe that I don't deserve to own that identity, that me owning that identity or taking space was in some way an act of violence. And that just made me feel mortified. Like, I didn't want to enact violence, you know, that was the last thing I wanted. And so it kept me away, which I'll get to that in just a moment. So now bringing this to the present, how am I relating now to this whole idea of not being Black enough, not being queer enough, and not being femme enough? Well, the way I think about it now is my experiences that I've had in this body have been inherently Black, queer, and femme. You know, it is so fucking Black to be in the spaces that I have been and to have questioned all of these things about myself. That's a very Black experience. I think there's a common cultural misconception that, you know, entering spaces that are not predominantly fill in the blank of your identity means that you're not that. And what I've come to realize is no, being in the space doesn't make you not that identity. It's like just existing in your body in that space is just that much of an experience. So the lived experience I've had at predominantly white institutions of education has been a very Black experience because, you know, it is very common for Black people in predominantly white institutions to feel on the outside. It is very common for Black people who haven't been exposed to certain things to struggle with accessing certain resources or even believe that they don't belong, or like that's actually Black as fuck. And I also have realized it's actually also very queer as fuck to feel isolated from queer community, to feel invisible from queer community, and to yearn for that connection. That's a very queer experience. You know, lots of queer people spend their youth or even into adulthood searching for their chosen family, for a queer space to belong, you know, and that's just like a very gay thing. And I thought that the searching meant that I didn't belong. I didn't understand that the search meant like this is actually very normal as a queer person. And I've come to recognize that my experience, like as a woman and a feminine identified person, that all the constructs around femininity and women in society are legitimately shit. And my experience, like it's really hard out here for feminine people in this very like masculine dominated world. There are so many constructs around femininity that I don't know, like I haven't met any woman or feminine identified person who has felt freed or seen or included by them. Like it's this wild rat race that we're all sort of chasing and trying to be enough in. And ironically, that's a very feminine experience in this masculine dominated world. And so I just now, the way I think about it is my literal lived experiences are inherently Black, queer, and femme. As I've been alluding to now, it's wonderful. I just feel this really deep sense of knowing of who I am. I just know it on such a deep level. And I just know that I am Black enough and Blackness defined. I know I am queer enough and queerness defined. I know I am femme enough and feminist defined. And it reminds me, this past December, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana for the first time. And I was in the Nkrumah, I think it's like National Memorial Park. I forgot exactly what it's called, but basically Ghana's first president, his burial site is a national park. And I remember I went there and I was listening to the tour guide share his life story, which, you know, was fascinating, and also the historian in me and the feminist in me knew there were holes to this story. I basically left with more questions than answers, which I think is healthy. But I just remember standing between his grave and his wife's grave, and I just had this aha moment hearing his own life story. I just deeply understood why my soul chose this life. I understood why my soul chose to express itself through my parents. I understand why my soul chose my parents. I understood why my soul chose for me to inherit a Ghanaian lineage and heritage and history. It's just hard to describe that feeling. It just clicked for me. And ever since then, I've just had this unshakable knowing that allows me to receive information, and I just feel so clear, and I just have such a strong, deep knowing, and I can now look back with clarity on all of my life experiences, but also the experience I had within the context of abuse, and all of the doubts that I had around my Blackness legitimately evaporated. Gone. Super gone. There was also this moment I had looking through the door of no return at Elmina Castle, and it was heavy, but I also felt free, and I understood the moment I looked through that door, which is not a door, but that is a whole nother conversation for a whole nother type of show. But I looked through the door of no return, and I just had this major aha moment that, oh, all of the suffering that I've endured in my life, and when I say suffering, I think about the pain I continue to experience because I did not use my words, my hands, or my feet to take me to a different place, right? I looked through that door, and I realized all the suffering I've ever experienced in my life has been because I didn't know who I was. And at the same time, I also instantly knew that type of suffering would never again happen in my life because I know who the fuck I am. It just was so clear looking through that. I know who the fuck I am, and no one can take that from me. And there's no question, seeing that door helped sort of solidify and give me perspective on my Blackness, like the violence of that door and the diaspora it created. And what existed before that, what exists and continues to exist before the door and afterwards, that is what I've inherited. That is what makes me fucking Black. And that's what makes me African. And it's not just the violence doesn't make me those things. The violence is just a reminder, like this travesty literally happened because of the Blackness and Africanness you have inherited. And so I just had that moment of clarity, which I'm so grateful for. And I just feel belonging. I feel like I belong because I do. And it's just so beautiful and such a gift to little Sable and all the versions of little Sable and that have ever existed. Because it's something she genuinely didn't know or understand or accept. The narratives that I hold now are that my existence is not an inconvenience or an exception to Blackness, queerness, or femness. You know, it's not. And whenever I encounter any person, space, or experience that tries to suggest it, I don't internalize that anymore. And I recognize something's off about this space, and that is trying to, that benefits from me having this altered perspective of myself, of this essential truth of me. I also understand that the identity privilege that relative to my partner, to my ex-wife, I realize now that that was sort of a play that, or really a tactic that facilitated me not trusting myself and me valuing her thoughts and her opinions over my own, over my own. That was just straight up tactic. I also, in line with that, I also recognize that with my ex-wife, I experienced interpersonal epistemic violence. And what I mean when I say that is, the idea of epistemic violence is the idea that certain domains and types of knowledge are deemed inadequate or less than. And within the context of that relationship, my self-knowledge was deemed inadequate and less than. And my ex-wife used epistemic violence to take and maintain power and control within the context of that abusive relationship. You know, all of this really functioned, all of this not enoughness that I walked into the relationship with, but that just got manipulated and put on steroids. All of that really functioned to put me in a lower place than my ex-wife. And I can understand that. Like, what I'm saying is that's how I understand what happened. And just being able to recognize it as such is it's just like a big point of like relief. And because there's just so much judgment and shame around this experience. And I think being able to name that this was another type of violence, like now I look at it and it's almost breathtaking in the worst way. Like, damn, like my identity and my being was on attack or being attacked. Like that's a depth of violence that's just like, whew, I don't feel like is really discussed. And particularly as a Black queer woman who has experienced interpartner violence, the function of identity politics was really huge in terms of the violence that I experienced, and I think is a nuance that's missing from mainstream conversations about domestic violence and interpartner violence, right? It's a nuance that's just lost, especially since I think there's this misperception. Well, like if you're any type of marginalized identity, you can only ever be oppressed. And I think what's missing from the conversation is that, you know, there are people at the margins that leverage and take advantage of that and use the knowing of sort of like the social hierarchy, like wield that over other people. And that's how I understand my experience now. And I think that's a layer and a nuance around my experience of intimate partner violence as a Black queer woman that's kind of missing from the mainstream conversation. But with that being said, today I firmly believe that I am Black enough and Black as fuck. I am queer enough and queer as fuck. I am femme enough and femme as fuck. Like that, it's just like, it doesn't get more enough than this right here for me, which it just feels so fucking fantastic to believe this and to know this. I think this belief might even be just as important. I also believe that I'm a part of those communities, and I also believe that any expectation to exclude or decenter any part of me is violent, and I don't stand for it. And I just don't think that's it's kind of, I just don't think it's inclusive, and I just don't think it's a holistic response. Like, so for example, for Black people that say they're all for Black people, they love all Black people, but have excuses around justifying the actions of Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, and R. Kelly, you're not for all Black people. Like, you're just not. Like, I'm thinking, for example, with R. Kelly took advantage of, abused, and violated Black people. Are the Black women and girls he violated, do they not count as Black? Like, I'm not here for it. And before I was like, oh, so torn about taking a stand. Now I don't give a fuck. I said what I said, I stand where I stand, and if you have beef with it, then you know what? That is a personal problem, because all that does is reveal to me information about you. Point blank, period. I said what I said. In terms of what I hope and desire for the future. So this journey is everlasting, and I really hope that this deep sense of enoughness that I have as it relates to my Blackness, queerness, and femness, I really hope for that sense of enoughness to translate to other areas of my life. And I know it's going to happen. It's just very much, in progress now. Like that whole like crystal clear moment, those moments I had in Ghana, they haven't, like, what is unique about those moments in Ghana is that once I had that aha moment, it's been unshakable. There aren't even doubts or thoughts that come in to challenge that at all. It's just gone. And I want to experience that as it relates to how my identity as, I'm just going to say, I've noticed I'm uncomfortable saying it, which means, I have to say it. But I realize I noticed that resistance as it relates to my identity as a business owner and as a visionary in education. And as someone who has a strong ideas and perspective on how to close opportunity gaps for all Black children. Like, I realize that. And that's what I hope for my future. I hope that I have those moments of like crystal clear enoughness that it becomes unrockable. And what I desire for myself, for you, for us is I desire for us to know that we always have been, are, and always will be enough. And I also desire that any of those, any thoughts, feelings, beliefs, narratives, or experiences that are incompatible with the notion that we are enough, I hope those things get fucking hijacked to the curb, because fuck that shit and fuck them. those things. They don't belong here. They're no longer welcome within the realm of my or your being or consciousness. There is no more space. The price of rent has gone up, and the low vibration cannot afford to stay here up in this space. And so, yeah, that's like what I really desire, especially since I am not feeling enough had a profound impact on my experience of intimate partner violence. And it was an incredibly powerful tool that was weaponized against me. And I've come to realize as long as I have a sense of my own enoughness, that is my greatest and fiercest protector, but it's also my gatekeeper to what I deserve and I'm worthy of, That's how I get in my way, is by not believing I am enough. And so I just really sincerely desire that as I continue to do my work in this area, that anything incompatible with it, hightails it to the curb. Okay? But yeah, wow. Episode 15. This is wild. I can't believe this is episode 15. I believe this is 100 Days of Truth, day 20. Thank you for joining me. I'm so curious. To what extent do you relate to this whole idea of enoughness? Even with whatever your respective identities are, how has not feeling enough, and what role did that play in your experience of intimate partner violence? And what role has discovering your enoughness played in your own healing journey? I'm curious. I'd love to know. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.